took her picture down at the museum. We have the fifth largest collection in the world of large Pleistocene megafauna at the ISU. Dad always in natural history, so we're seeing pull out here. Yeah, that's it. Exact match. But that one again, my hope was piqued a little bit by that experience. But someday, maybe. But it's just a combination of rarity and the physical environment. You know, for example, chimpanzees have split from the last common ancestor with humans 5 to 7 million years ago. And so they've had a tenure in Africa somewhere in that range, probably 5 to 7, maybe 3 to 7 million years ago. And yet for all that time, we have 4 teeth representing one individual, 4 fossil teeth of primate ancestors in Africa, because they occupy wet tropical forests and very acidic soils, and the remains just don't persist. So those are examples.
What do you believe about the giants and the mounds and the 2 rows of teeth?
Well, show me one. I have every example of giants that I have tried to pin down. There's no substance to the story. Smithsonian, they don't have any.
Well, that's where they were. I just heard a show, a guy wrote a book, and he went to all them little towns on the East Coast.
On the East Coast.
And, record after record in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the archaeologists dug them up, but they all end up going.
Yeah, well, it makes a great conspiracy. I've been behind the scenes enough with these museums to know. I mean, if there was something like that, that would be a great discovery. There are people clamoring to build their careers on that. And so this notion that there is a warehouse with created mysteries tucked away because the people aren't prepared, would shake their faith or undermine their religion. Every one of those stories, the Lovelock Cave, for example, it's got a lot of notoriety. And someone sent me a photograph, and what they had done, it's this simple trick of photography. Hunters use it all the time. Have you ever seen a picture of a hunter sitting in front of his game? No, they're always about 3 feet behind, because then when you take a picture, it looks huge. The only one where that isn't the case is there's that kid who shot that bear, and he's sitting right there holding the paw up with his hands and holding it, and it is huge. But you get a foot or two behind your elk with its rack, and the rack looks 2 or 3 feet bigger than it actually is. And what they did is they took a picture fairly close of the skull on the ground with the scale on the ground. So on a normal skull, that means about 5.5 inches away. Well, that's enough to increase the appearance of the skull relative to the scale, about 35% more than what it actually is. And the photograph had no features whatsoever that weren't absolutely, entirely anatomically modern. And I called the curator up and I asked her, and I pointed this out, and I said, what are the actual dimensions? And they fell well.
What I'm saying is, look how long it took them, and they're still, that Columbus was the first European to step foot in America. I mean, and that's been proven wrong.
Oh,
and
sure.
It took hundreds of years for them to admit that.
Well, yeah. It wasn't so much. It wasn't that they said that Leif Erikson and those other people weren't here. It was a matter of emphasis. I mean, it's that Eurocentric attitude that, it was Columbus that got us here, not Leif. Leif Erikson, we're not speaking Norwegian, we're not wearing Viking helmets, and so we're
not speaking Spanish either.
Well, that's true. Or Portuguese. Yeah.
How's the Falcon project coming?
Slowly. This was interesting, to be absolutely frank with you. Well, when William Barnes approached me about it, when he put on this thing in St. George, and he just kind of mentioned, initially he just recruited me and John Myanzinski and John Bindernagel to speak at a conference he was putting on. And it wasn't really clear to me at the time what his intent for that event was. But then he introduced his notion of this approach. And I thought it was interesting. You know, it was ambitious. It was interesting. And he had at least two people. Well, Wally Hermson was there, showing a lot of interest. Wally, who was bankrolled Melba, bankrolled Matt Moneymaker for several years, and then now has assisted Derek Randalls in a lot of his Ridgewalkers project, the Olympic project, where they have been putting out cameras, probably the most ambitious camera trap undertaking that's out there. So it looked, and there was another gentleman from Utah who was very wealthy, was interested in paying for the whole project up front, almost, a big chunk of it. And then plus, this was what killed me. He had it set up for live stream, and he was going to charge, William was going to charge a nominal subscription fee to log in, and you could watch the conference from anywhere in the world you wanted. But William is so paranoid that he not be perceived as a gold digger, just trying to exploit the circumstance, the situation, that he reconsidered, and at the last minute he dropped the subscription fee. He ended up having 44,000 people subscribe to watch it. This is the numbers they quoted us. If you just charged $10 a head, we would have had the $400,000 you were after, and you wouldn't be standing here with your hand in your hat, your hat in your hand. And so, unfortunately, Wally got burned with Melba, the fiasco, and I think he's kind of laying low. And the gentleman from Utah, he initially wanted to sign on for it if we gave him the coordinates so he could go shoot one, recover it. And we said, well, that's not an option. Then he changed his tune when he saw we weren't going to budget. But his financial situation depended on the sale of a significant piece of property, which, because of the downturn in the economy, has taken longer, may not happen, may not. So that is the vagaries of the economy. But I thought, I hope that if we could repeat that experience with the 44,000 subscribers, we could at least get out of the gate in good form. So he came to me basically hoping for a venue that, if the project was carried out under the auspices of the university, then donations were tax deductible, and we had the credibility of a university, a research institution, and the oversight of the ISU Foundation or the Office of Research, whichever it worked out. And so and the FAA permits for a research and educational project were very liberal by comparison to the requirements for a private commercial venture. So that's where we were at. But unfortunately, we tried to recreate the event in St. George, and unfortunately there was a number of things that happened and it kind of imploded. But what's been curious, I thought that on the basis of that, and on the basis of the publicity we had garnered, and huge interest in the proposition, that there would be a groundswell of grassroots support, and every Bigfooter out there would write a check for $10, $15, $25, and we'd see that account grow geometrically very quickly. Well, we launched a Kickstart campaign, and instead of 44,000 contributors, we had 6. So for some reason, I think some of it's sticker shock. It's ambitious. So 220,000 for the airship, this dual catamaran airship, 60,000 for the thermal imaging and videography equipment, and then the command center, the fuel, the helium, the ground support team, and hoping to do it long term. $400,000 is a lot of money. It seems like, and I think that, what's my $10 going to do? But if everybody, if it was 44,000 people at $10, then we'd be there just like that. But it didn't. And there's been a lot of negativity. People like Matt Moneymaker came out very negative. Tom Powell wrote a very uninformed opinion of it, which he's changed 180 degrees now. And he was at our event. We had an event in Portland, but the event, like I said, in Portland kind of nosedived a little bit. I think both attendance and our arrangements for a live stream for that event fell through days before the event was to take place. So what would have potentially been a cash cow, you know, turned into kind of a flash, a little sputter in the pan.
I don't mean to change gears here, but could you explain to the audience, maybe probably a lot of them know
What the Falcon project is?
No,
Oh.
well, I was going to elaborate on that too, but the Slocum cast.
Scoop, yeah.
I'm sorry. That's one of the best, right?
Well, the what?
One of the best pieces of evidence, right? What's your take on that?
Yeah.
Can you explain to everybody what it is?
The Skookum cast is a body imprint, not just a footprint or a handprint, but a large, seems to be a large portion of a body. Now the question is, what's the body? When we looked at it, I could look at it and see there were some telltale signs that suggested to me that it was a hominoid that was down on its haunch, and there was a feature that remarkably resembled a heel imprint, pushed into the ground repeatedly, and a forearm with the elbow and the heel of the palm, kind of a clenched fist. And so what we envisioned, what had happened was this Matt Moneymaker and Derek Randalls and Rick Knoll and getting old and can't remember names, the wildlife biologist in Oregon. Anyway, it'll pop back in my head. There were a number of people involved with this. They were using thermal imaging to cruise on the road slowly at night, looking for sign of any animals crossing or animals in the roadway. There was a turnabout on the side of the road that was graded mud, very chopped up from traffic, vehicle traffic, and animals, because the way it was graded, when it would rain, it would fill in with a puddle of water. And then as that water would dissipate, would evaporate, it would shrink down and leave kind of a halo of very soft, not mud, but clay. It was very clay soil, very plastic. You could pick it up and it was just like, you know, like the clay used in grade school, grammar school. They left the remainder of the fruit they had on the margin of that puddle, and Greg Bandovic was there too, I think. And they hung one of his pheromone chips, or they had one of his pheromone chips, with a heavy baling wire from a tree branch right adjacent to it. They came back the next morning, and they deposited this stuff about 2 a.m. on their return after their night cruising. They came back sometime between 6 and 8 in the morning, as I recall, and the fruit had been munched upon. There was apple, lots of apples were in it. There were apple rind, skin, in a little pile there. And as they looked, then they could see these imprints with clear, in that clay soil, imprints of hair. And these unusual looking, what looked like heel imprints. Heel imprints with a very defined calcaneal tendon, it appeared. Well, looked at that, you know, and we were intrigued. The flow pattern of the hair was very distinct. There were ungulate hoof prints. There was a deer trail that crisscrossed it, and there were elk tracks that went across at an angle. And they also found some sign of bear adjacent, not right there, and a coyote went traveling across. One of its footprints was right in the heel imprint of one of the heel imprints. And so they cast 200 pounds of plaster. They you know, some of the critics have criticized, what in the world do they do with 200 pounds of plaster? Well, they pooled all the plaster that everyone had brought along with them and came up with 200 pounds, and they commandeered some aluminum tent poles to make a frame to help make supports for it. They framed it out and they cast it. And it's a remarkable cast. The critics who had never seen the imprint itself and never examined the original, like Cliff Crook, was very quick to immediately declare that it was an elk bed. And who else jumped on board? Ohio. Oh, shucks, boy, name's really bad. Don Key jumped on the bandwagon too, and some other people. And the first thing that we did was I took photographs of that to our park, our zoological park in Pocatello, which is limited to indigenous species. And they have a great big paddock with deer and pronghorn antelope and bison and elk all together in this area. And I went to the keepers and I showed them his imprints and I said, you know, have you ever seen anything that resembles this? You know, could you interpret this as an elk imprint? And they said no. And John Green took photographs, they made these big, great big, sort of 20 by 20 poster sized prints, and took it to a game ranch that raised elk and asked them. And they said, yeah, it resembles it, but not. So all these other critics that were from, you know, opining from the armchair were adamant that it was elk. You know, there are some superficial resemblances, but one of the key things that the most critical one is, you have a 600-pound, 800-pound elk, how does it get up? The only way you can lift that center of mass is if you put the feet right underneath it and stand up. That means that these imprints are always going to end with hoof prints, 4 hoof prints right in the center. The elk tracks that are associated are in proximity are not associated with it other than walking across it. There are no elk tracks right underneath it. So, you know, somehow it levitated and got up over onto here or something. What we interpreted as the heel, and what was really striking is Rick Knoll took his heel and stuck it into Play-Doh at that same angle and made a plaster cast. And when you put that cast next to it, the resemblance is remarkable. The only other interpretation is that it's the wrist of an elk. So what we think is the buttock, they're saying is the haunch, and the forearm would be the hind leg from the knee down to the ankle. And then what we're calling the heels are actually the wrists, they're saying, set down at the times. But the problem is, we got, again, Rick got a hold of it from a friend who had just shot an elk off the front limb, made an imprint with the wrist of this elk, and it doesn't resemble it only superficially. And the hair is growing in the wrong direction. You can see what looks like a heel with sort of that orange peel texture to the skin, the hairless skin, grading into hairy skin, with the hair growing down, let's see, no, it's growing at an angle across the Achilles tendon. And the, oh yeah, and so, yeah, the wrist. So the, what would be the imprint of the Achilles tendon would have to be not the cannon bone, of course, but the metacarpals of the elk's hand, the long metacarpals. Actually only one, it's all fused into one, and it splits at the end and they have them into phalanges and hooves. And that's it. You would, so if it was that part of the wrist, that was it. I'm trying to get the hair in my head. It's been a while since I thought about this. If that's bent back, the hair is going to be growing upward on the Achilles tendon rather than downward towards the heel as it would on a primate. So the hair is growing in the wrong direction. Plus the sharpness of that makes much more sense with the large hollow behind it, because Sasquatch has this elongated heel to increase the mechanical advantage of the heel because of the mid-tarsal bray. And so the distance between the tibia, the shin bone, and the Achilles tendon is exaggerated compared to us. This is why witnesses often describe as very thick-looking ankles, because the distance is translated back by that elongated heel segment. And also why the critics, when they look at the Patterson film, when the foot is swinging and the Achilles tendon is slack, the heel is more prominent. They say, oh look, Dave Daglin in his book points out. Well, he even went so far as to say it's anatomically impossible for the Achilles tendon to be attached further distally on the heel segment, you know, as it appears in this image? Well, there is, the image that he selected is when the foot is swinging, tension is taken off of the Achilles tendon,